whatever. So I think we've definitely changed in that sense in primary care.
Lisa, I'm reading a book at the moment that will resonate with you. I think 3/4 of the way through it. It's called The Rag and Bone Shop, How We Make Memories and Memories Make Us. And it's by Veronica O'Keefe. She's a psychiatrist, and it's just brilliant. Her narrative on the patients that she's looked after over 20 odd years as a consultant psychiatrist, in particular around memories and memory function. It's you'd enjoy it with the line of work you're in.
The Oral Apothecary is sponsored by Jamie Hayes Executive Coaching and OneLessPill.com.
I'm not sure we've helped you with your decision about your crossroads in life, but sounds fascinating, and we wish you all the luck with that. But one of the other reasons for coming on the podcast, as you know, is to give us a few things for the listener from your point of view. So the first thing we always ask people is for a desert island drug, and this is something not to save you on a desert island, but a medicine that evokes very powerful memory for you. So what would you like to give us?
Well, I'm hoping that you'll let me be selfish, because I work in dual sectors and I should be allowed to.
Oh, not again.
Come on. In fact, to be fair, do you know what? I'll give you my human one, and I reckon that's probably already on the list. So I'm going to say clozapine.
It's not.
Strangely not, no.
No.
And purely because obviously I've worked with clozapine for quite some time, it gets the job done, quite frankly, when everything else has failed. So obviously we all know it's not an easy ride in terms of the side effects and everything, but it does what we need. And I have been... where I'm working, we were a trial site for the CALM study, if you know about that at all. So that was for the treatment of borderline personality disorder. So we were heavily involved in that study. I see that as a desert island drug for me in terms of human healthcare.
So how long has clozapine been with you then, Lisa, in 20 years ago when, the results used to get faxed through or whatever, and have you seen it change over that time?
Well, so obviously I've been working where I am for 6 years. Before that, we did do outpatient prescriptions and things like that. I didn't really understand it in the depth that I do now, obviously.
Okay. The technology has caught up, because back in the day, it used to be quite an arduous process, didn't it, to get the results?
Yes.
I'm sitting in a room right now with a Potchi machine. Anybody who knows what one of those is. A Potchi machine. I can run bloods right behind me and get an instant result.
So my wife who's a pharmacist, prescribes clozapine, and I'm going to play that description back to it. It gets the job done. I really like that.
Gets the job done when everything else has failed.
It is a good drug. I know when I've taught medical students over the years, I often would use clozapine as a really good example, actually, of a drug that might come with a lot of tags to it. In other words, it's got all this monitoring, therefore that can make it very expensive. But actually, as you said, where everything else has failed, it's actually very good. And so as long as you can go through with the monitoring and you can put up with the side effects, so I think you've actually nailed it in relation to the type of drug that it is. And we certainly haven't had clozapine, so we will certainly accept that as your desert island drug.
But I do have to throw a veterinary one in, don't I?
You can humour us, but...
Yeah, go on then.
So I'm going to say Vetaril, which is trilostane, which is used for the kind of treatment and management of Cushing's disease syndrome in dogs. And the reason for that is because I, unfortunately, have lost my precious little Yorkshire Terrier, Molly, earlier in the year. And she's been with me for 11 years. So that's 11 years of my career that she's been with me. And that drug gave me a lot longer with her than I wouldn't have had her. So I would like that added as a veterinary drug.
I'm making an executive decision to let that in.
Thank you very much.
You tugged at the heartstrings there.
Look, but we're looking at humour in healthcare, and I'm going to say no. Because what does it say? Comedy equals tragedy plus time.
No, it's 3 against 1, Jamie.
Is it too soon?
Okay.
So what was it again? What was it called again? Because we haven't had a veterinary drug in, to be fair.
Well, it was a brand as well to start with.
It's Vetaril. So it's the licensed medicine in the UK for...
What is it then? Is it a steroid or is it a...
Ooh. Now you're asking. The active ingredient is trilostane.
It's got to be a corticosteroid if you've got addis.
Yeah, because it is for pituitary dependent and adrenal dependent.
But it's really expensive as well.
Yeah, I was getting to the limit of my insurance limits, I'm going to say.
Yeah, let's not go there. So, okay. Well, we'll let you have that for now, but it might get edited out. But definitely clozapine. Love that. That's a good choice. Okay, the second thing we usually ask guests for is a career anthem for the Oral Apothecary Spotify playlist. And just to remind the new listeners, are there any of those? You can actually go to Spotify and look up Oral Apothecary. You won't just find the podcast, but you'll actually find the playlist of all the guests' choices. So what would you like to offer us?
So this was a tough one, but I am going with Johnny Cash and Ring of Fire.
Oh, Great song.
Come on, we've all, whatever you try and do, you're always walking into a fire pit, aren't you? I certainly have been my entire career.
Oh, I love that song.
Yeah.
It's also a Liverpool FC anthem as well.
Well, I remember it on the Royal Family. Do you remember when the decorator, his mate, who I think he's a Liverpudlian, is decorating? Do you not remember that?
Yeah, Eddie Yates from Coronation Street.
Yes. And the Ring of Fire comes on. I love that song. Okay, but from a career point of view, what you're saying is you've gone into some fire pits. You sound to me like the sort of person who takes that on as a real challenge and gets the job done. A bit like the clozapine.
Yeah. So I don't see that as a negative at all. I thrive on this kind of thing.
I get that. Yeah, you're a clozapine extinguisher. Got it. So the third thing is a book for the Oral Apothecary Library. So what would you like to offer us for that?
Okay, so this is probably a little bit more sensible, I guess. So I'm going to offer, it's called Your Time to Thrive, and it's by Marina Kidekel, if I've said that right. It kind of just gives you simple techniques to enhance your life, so to like unlocking your potential, but it's just like one micro step at a time. So you're trying to make big changes. So like, for example, ensuring that you declare an end to your working day so that you have that balanced lifestyle. And obviously, whilst I was doing my master's degree, for example, I needed to be able to declare an end to my working day so that I could then switch over to the veterinary world.
James, have you read that?
I haven't read it, but we should just point out to the listener that Lisa has actually stayed on in work tonight as well to record the podcast.
Whereas the rest of us are declaring that work is finished with a beverage.
I'm on the water tonight. So that sounds like a good book for New Year, actually, doesn't it? With New Year's resolution. I see lots of these books with these hints and tips and stuff, but you're saying this has actually genuinely been impactful, has it, in terms of...
Yeah, because it's very, very little steps, so it's manageable. Do you know what I mean? You don't deter from it because it's only little things.
I like the sound of that.
Well, you can definitely have that. So Your Time to Thrive. It actually has, the full title is End Burnout, Increase Wellbeing and Unlock Your Full Potential with the New Science of Micro Steps.
There you go.
Do you know what the biggest selling book was of 2021? Oh, well, on Amazon.
Was it a Torvastatin?
No.
Oh no, that was from the quiz.
Well, it was one we've mentioned before. I can't remember if someone's had it or whether
Atomic
we
Habits,
talked
was
about it. Yes, correct. It was Atomic Habits. It's the biggest selling book. The reason that popped into my head was that you said micro steps there, and that's one of the things that he talks about is small incremental gains, doesn't he?
It was Diane that mentioned that.
It was, yeah, that's right.
Thank you very much. Our micro discussion next. So from Harvard Business Review, two authors asked the question, when is humour helpful? They observe that the reality is that injecting light-hearted remarks into professional interactions always entails risk. And so they started looking at what patients value most in their care, and they used artificial intelligence and natural language processing to extract positive and negative insights from patients in the United States. They looked at over 1.25 million insights, and they came up with that humour came up lots and lots of times. Lisa, did you ever look at it or a read of it?
I did, and this resonated with me, I'm not going to lie, because I try to be funny a lot, and it does backfire reasonably frequently.
It says that.
When you're trying to kind of keep morale up, particularly over the last 2 years, obviously you try and throw in the humour, and sometimes it's just not really appreciated. But the other times, it creates exactly what you wanted, doesn't it? Can fire everyone up.
You get that instant feedback, do you, Lisa?
I think you can tell, can't you, when someone looks at you funny.
Well, STC struggles with this.
What people don't know is behind the scenes editorially, we're often having to take out a couple of Steve's jokes just to be on the safe side. Now, I thought it was a really good paper, Jamie, and I really liked that line. Is that I can't remember who it was. It was either Ricky Gervais or who's the guy off Curb Your Enthusiasm? Larry David, is it? And they talk about humour as a risk. And virtually every joke is a risk because, that's what a joke is, isn't it? Is you're sort of trying to surprise someone or shock someone, but keep it in the bounds of good taste. And I think that's become a little bit more difficult lately, but it's also meant that we're being less offensive. So that is a good thing. But I think there's some really important points in this paper, and I particularly like this bit. It talked about humour came up repeatedly when patients were describing positive experiences, yet they were unable to find any employer who employed someone on the basis of their ability to make people laugh. And I thought that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Is when we're employing people in technical roles like in medicine and pharmacy and stuff, do we or are we or should we allowed to think about personality and the ability to sort of engage with people, because that's what this is really about, isn't it? Is the ability to engage with people. So I thought it was, from that point of view, really interesting.
I took it from a clinician's point of view. The way I would talk about this is, and again, I can talk from experience over many years of being a prescriber. It's about trust and relationship. So if you haven't got the relationship, then using humour can go terribly wrong. And so I guess an analogy would be, at what point in a relationship is it safe to, pass wind or burp at the table with your mother-in-law? You have to feel comfortable with whether or not you're going to attempt it or not. And so we've all probably got examples where we've tried to use humour because we thought it was the right thing to do. And this paper gives examples of where the patient remembers distinctly that it went horribly wrong. The way that it talks about it in the paper, and I think this is right, and if you go right back to our very first episode, we talked about authenticity and compassion. And what it says is that actually, if you get it right, humour at the right time, if you've got a good connection with that person, really comes across well. And I think that's what I took most from the paper. And I'll give you an example from this very day when I had this patient today and she had her live-in carer with her, and we were talking about the difficulty with her going to the toilet because she was constipated. And the carer said to her, the Bristol stool chart. Sometimes you're number 1 and sometimes you're number 7. And I'd been with this patient for a little while, but I'd never met them before. And I chanced my arm and I said, "Oh, have you never seen the Bristol chocolate stool chart?" I said, "Because that's a really helpful way of understanding about what we're talking about." And she looked at me dull. And so, you can pull it up if you've never seen it. Just Google it. And there's your alternative stool chart. So your type 1 is Maltesers. And then you go through your Lion Bar and Toffee Crisp all the way through to type 7, which is hot chocolate. So I used humour in that sense, and she got it. She laughed and she was like, "Okay, yeah, and so what is it that I need to take so that I get a better stool?" So it worked.
Keep that pause in, Jim. So it's interesting that when you all started, you started talking about jokes. In my reading around the subject, there's 3 words that come up. There's humour, there's comedy, and there's laughter. And if you look at laughter in healthcare, then there's a lot out there for laughter to improve, physiological and psychological states. Laughter yoga, the evidence base for laughter yoga, where you just laugh. And there's no joke, there's no comedy, there's no humour involved. It's just the actual physical act of laughing.
You'd laugh if you saw me do yoga.
Yeah. It's a fascinating area. Look, from Laughing Leaves Me Lighter, an editorial on COVID in JAMA, humour can really help us cope. And we can actively increase the humour in our lives to increase our well-being. A high level of tact, sensitivity and consideration is called for when using humour, and he describes benign humour to boost coping, well-being and social bonding. And then importantly for us, I suppose, and this is something that we did discuss at the start of the podcast, is that 70% of humour occurs spontaneously in everyday life. So it's not about manufacturing it or necessarily telling jokes. And we said right at the start, didn't we, Steve, that where there's truth, there's humour.
And I think that's come across, for example, I remember when we spoke to Mark, and about the conversations, again, I've listened to another podcast recently, I'll bring it up at another time, about, having a good death. And that person resonated a lot with me in what Mark had said about having the right conversation. But, as I said before, about the trust and the relationship and knowing whether or not you can say it or not. So as I give a really bad example, when I was much younger and less experienced in a diabetic setting, I used to use the word to somebody who was a ticking time bomb. And, somebody would burst into tears. And I soon realized that is not a term that you can use lightly. I still use it, but I would only use it if I really felt I had a relationship and the trust that I could use that term. I'm just being very honest about it. So I think humour is the same in the way that you go about things. So weight management, you have to be careful about how you go about that.
So Professor Mark Talbot did have the unique, he did tell a joke in the Christmas special, didn't he?
Yeah. But he did talk when we spoke to him, didn't we, and he's using humour very close to the point when people are dying and their family around, and people, well, in the whole, and as you say, Steve, they've got that relationship. People welcome it, don't they? And in the setting you work, Lisa, I guess, mental health, maybe not the animals, but in mental health, you'll see a lot of humour used in difficult situations, I would imagine, to help the patients and the staff deal with what is difficult situations.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes people feel comfortable, doesn't it? It can lighten a bad or negative situation, can't it?
It just reminded me of something, actually, when I was talking about nut allergy earlier. I remember this case some years years ago now, where a lady was complaining that she couldn't use the vaginal cream that she'd been prescribed because of having painful sex, because she was